like to do all sorts of different styles of fiber art. I love sewing, knitting, crochet, embroidery, all sorts of crafts. But I want to delve into some lesser known crafts, things you won't find a kit for at your local Michael's. I want to learn the arcane textile arts. So today I'm going to attempt to learn the basics of 3 different, more niche styles of fiber art. Now, none of these techniques are anything that's completely unheard of. Let's be honest, if you're subscribed to this channel or if the YouTube algorithm served it up to you, you're probably at least a little bit familiar with them. So if you saw the title and got excited thinking it was going to be a new craft you could try out, and it ends up being something that you already know how to do, sorry for the clickbait, I guess. A few quick disclaimers before we get started. This is not a tutorial. I am learning how to do these things for the first time. I cannot teach other people how to do them. I will be linking all of the resources that I found useful down below in the description, so I would recommend checking those out if you want to learn how to do any of the things that I tried today. But the point of this video is to entertain, not to instruct. In a similar vein, I am not a historian. All of the techniques that I'm going to be trying out today are very old and have a lot of history associated with them, and the history is very cool and very interesting. However, it is not my area of expertise, and I don't want to get things wrong. Don't have the training to really handle all of that correctly, so I'm gonna leave that to the more qualified people. I might touch very briefly on some of the history, but the point of this video is me trying out some new things and trying to learn some new skills. On that note, if you are watching this and you are someone who's very experienced with any or all of these crafts, first of all, please be nice to me. I don't know what I'm doing. But secondly, if you feel so inclined, please do share any of your expertise down below in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And so, without any further ado, let's get started. The first technique that I want to try out is tablet weaving. This is a very old technique. I believe it dates back to the Iron Age, if I recall correctly. I got a lot of recommendations to try this out when I did my video on backstrap weaving. From what I can tell, there's a lot of overlap between the two. You can do tablet weaving in a weaver tensioned setup, the same as backstrap, but you can also do it using other looms like an inkle loom. But with tablet weaving, instead of using shed sticks and heddle strings to open and close the shed, you're using tablets, which are little square cards with holes punched into the corners, and you thread the warp yarns through those holes, and then you can rotate the cards, and that manipulates the warp yarns in a way that opens and closes the shed. From what I've seen, it's typically used to make narrow bands of weaving, and you can do a lot of really cool patterns and color work with it. So I'm really excited to give it a shot and try it out, but before I can, I need to make a set of tablets. Weaving tablets can be made from a variety of materials, from wood to bone to playing cards. I decided to use some scraps of mat board that I had on hand. I cut out as many 2x2 inch squares as possible from the chunk that I had, and I ended up with 9. Then I marked out the placement of the holes. I was following a tutorial from Shelagh Lewins, which will be linked down below along with all of the other resources. She has you mark an X on the square from corner to corner, then use a compass to draw a circle that just touches the sides of the square. Then you punch holes at the 4 points where the X and the circle intersect. If you're using playing cards, which is literally what every single resource I looked at suggested for your first set of tablets, but not what I did for some reason, you can just use a regular old hole punch. But since the mat board I was using was much heavier and thicker, I had to resort to other methods. I tried to smooth down some of the tear out from the drilling with an awl, but it didn't help too much. Then I just needed to round off the corners to help the cards turn more smoothly while I'm weaving, and then repeat all of that again for all of the other cards. With all the tablets prepared, next I needed to set up my warp. A few of the sources I looked at suggested starting out with crochet cotton, which I also happen to have on hand, but only in white. The main feature of tablet weaving that I'm interested in is the ability to make patterns and designs by using different colors, so I really wanted at least one other color of crochet cotton for this first test. Instead of going out and buying more thread and another color, I did some very lazy dyeing by soaking a chunk of the crochet cotton in some watered down acrylic paint for about an hour or so. I ended up with a nice light pink, which was just enough contrast for weaving stripes. Then I could actually set up my warp. I was still following the tutorial from Shelagh Lewins, and she gives directions for setting up 8 tablets to weave horizontal stripes. So per her instructions, I cut 16 lengths each of the white and pink thread, all at 6 feet long, then threaded them through the holes on the tablets so that there were 2 threads of each color in each tablet. This was definitely not the easiest way to go about warping. Eventually I found a tutorial for continuous warping, which is much more efficient, but for this first attempt I was measuring the thread against a quilting ruler and then threading individual strands through each hole one at a time. Once everything was threaded up, I tied all the warp threads together at both ends using slip knots. I attached the far end to a fixed point, in my case a camera camera stand mounted to my desk, and secured the other to a piece of dowel that I hooked up to my back strap, which I made in my previous weaving video. For the shuttle, the thing I'll use to pass the weft yarn back and forth, I just use one of those little cardboard embroidery floss holders wrapped with more of the crochet cotton. Now I could actually start weaving. I passed the shuttle through the shed, then rotated all the cards together 1/4 turn. It took some fumbling to find the coordination for the motion, and I also had a bit too much tension on the warp at first, but even still, it was really simple to open a new shed and keep passing the shuttle back and forth. One thing about tablet weaving is that you're not just moving the warp threads up and down to open the new shed, you're actually twisting them together. Welcome to my sick and twisted warp threads. This makes the finished band stronger than normal weaving, but it also means that after a while the warp starts to twist together. To fix this, you can either flip the tablets over to change them from an S to a Z twist, or vice versa, which is what I did, or you can start turning them in the opposite direction. I had been turning the tablets a 1/4 turn away from myself as I worked, so to untwist the warp, I could have started turning them towards me. Both methods, flipping the tablets and reversing the direction, creates a bit of a bump in the work, and eventually the warp will start to over-twist in the opposite direction, so you'll have to flip or reverse again back to the initial direction. Reversing the direction also reverses the pattern of the weaving, but you can incorporate this into the design by switching direction back and forth at regular intervals to create a pattern that twists and untwists itself, making it twist neutral. Okay, so it is the next day. After my first attempt at tablet weaving, I have learned several things. I'm making a few changes. First of all, the tablets that I made out of the mat board. Not a good choice. I think there was just too much friction between the mat board and the threads, so it wasn't super easy to turn the cards and move them as I needed. Secondly, since I used a black mat board, the pigment in the material was rubbing off onto the threads, and so it made all of my work just kind of like dull and dingy, which I really don't like, so I'm switching to a new material for my cards. I've already gone ahead and made them. It's called Yupo paper. I remember it was like kind of a trendy thing for a little bit several years ago, but I had a little sample book of it. It's like a plastic sheet. Basically, I remember they were branding it as like a plastic paper. It's kind of like vellum, but not. It's thin sheets of plastic, basically, but it's lightweight and sturdy, and I think it'll work well for this application. So I've gone ahead and cut that down into squares, punched the holes, rounded the corners. I also tried to label them this time by marking the holes A, B, C, D, and then numbering the cards. I've been doing more research and looking at patterns, and having things labeled and marked out like that seems to be very helpful, so I tried to do that, but as I said, it's plastic, so it's kind of hard to write on, so there's a faint ghost of the markings that I made in pen that have rubbed off almost immediately, but maybe it'll help, I don't know. I'm also going to switch the yarn that I'm working with. The number 10 crochet cotton that I was using is just a little too heavy, a little too much friction. I know people do tablet weaving with much heavier yarns, but I think for starting out, it just wasn't working super well for me, so I'm gonna try working with pearl cotton embroidery floss this time and see if that works a bit better. It's a lot smoother, so I think I should have an easier time. Maybe the crochet cotton with the Yupo cards will work better than with the mat board, but I'm gonna switch to the embroidery floss just to test it out. Also, I have more colors of the embroidery floss than I do of the crochet cotton, so there's more options and variety available for me. Also, I realized I'm just practicing and testing things out. I don't need 6 feet of warp, so I'm gonna do a much shorter warp for this next weaving that I'm going to try, probably like 3 feet, just to keep things a little bit easier to manage and control. I'm going to try a new pattern. I found a video tutorial walking through this pattern. I will link that below, along with whatever other resources I have referenced so far in this video. It's from Elewys of Finchingefeld over on YouTube. She seems to be a pretty good resource for tablet weaving information. It seems like a pretty simple, beginner-friendly pattern, so I'm going to try and weave up a little section of this and see if I get the hang of it a bit better, and also see if changing my materials helps out. Attempt number 2 went much smoother, quite literally. The pearl cotton was a lot easier to work with, and the Yupo tablets slid along the warp much better. They were rather on the thin side though, so they were very bendy and a little hard to control in that way. I also experimented with the weft material this time. I started out using the crochet cotton again since I still had some on the shuttle, but eventually I switched to the pearl cotton, which gave me a slightly thinner, smoother band than the crochet yarn. The pattern that I followed was super simple. All of the work is done in the setup. You just put specific colors of yarn into specific holes on the tablets and make sure they're threaded in the right direction for a Z or S twist according to the pattern. Then it's just straightforward weaving, no changes in direction needed other than to untwist the warp. I think you can really see my progress in this band. The weaving gets neater and the pattern gets clearer as you look from the start of the band to the end. Okay, so now that I've played around a bit with tablet weaving and I feel like I have a good understanding of the basics, I want to move on to the next fiber art technique that I want to try out in this video, and that is sprung, or sprang, maybe. I'm really not sure how to pronounce this one. Most of the sources that I've found are written, so there's no way to tell how it's meant to be pronounced, and the two that I have found that have audio both pronounce it differently, so it might be sprang, it might be sprung, it might be a secret third thing. I'm gonna go with sprung for this video. It is a Swedish word, and to be honest, I don't know anything about the Swedish language, but sprung feels like it might be closer to the correct pronunciation. If you have any input on this, if you speak Swedish or anything, or you just know the correct answer, please let me know down in the comments. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, I'm doing my best. I'm gonna try and be consistent and go with sprung for this video, but I might flip-flop and pronounce it differently at different points. In summary, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna try anyways. That's kind of the thesis of this channel. So however you pronounce it, sprung is another very old textile technique. I believe it dates back to the Bronze Age. Researchers have found examples of this technique all over the world, throughout Europe, in North America, South America, Western Asia, Central Asia, Northern Africa. So it's practiced all over the world, and it is a very interesting technique. It's kind of similar to weaving, but it is not weaving. You do have warp threads, but there is no weft that gets woven in between those warps. Instead, you're twining and twisting the warps together in a regular pattern that creates a fabric. The finished fabric kind of resembles knitting. I've read a lot that the archaeological samples that people have found are frequently misidentified as knitting, but sprung is actually even older than knitting. This technique predates knitting. I'm very interested in this technique because it's not like anything I've ever really seen. Like with tablet weaving, that's just a specialized form of weaving, and I'm familiar with that basic concept, so it's not like a whole new thing for me to try and grasp. But sprung is like a completely new thing for me, so I'm very excited to try it out and see what I can do with it. For my first foray into sprung, I followed a tutorial from Carol James, aka the Sprang Lady. Although she pronounces it sprang, so I guess she's the Sprang Lady, but I digress. Typically with sprung, you need a loom or a frame of some sort to secure both ends of your warp, but in this tutorial, Carol shows you how to make a simple band with no loom. You just tape the top end of the yarn to your work surface. She kept the other end of the sprung free in this tutorial, but I secured mine to a ribbon tied around my waist since I was still in tablet weaving mode. One of the really interesting aspects of sprung is that you work from the middle out. You crisscross the warps at the center of the work, and then they begin interlocking at the top and bottom. So you're forming fabric from both ends and they slowly meet in the middle. That's why you want to secure both ends. If the bottom is just left loose, the twist in the yarn can work its way out and you won't form fabric at both ends, just at the top. The basic motions of sprung are picking up and putting down the warp threads in an alternating pattern. You have a top layer of threads and a bottom layer. You hold the top layer in one hand and use the other hand to pick up the first strand on the bottom and bring it up to the top. Then you drop the first top thread down to the bottom and repeat that all across the row. Now all of the top and bottom threads have swapped places. The next row is the same, except this time you start by picking up the first two threads at the bottom, then continue picking up and dropping one by one. This means you're twisting each thread around a different partner than you did in the last row, which is what creates the mesh chain link pattern. You're basically making all the warps do a square dance together. To finish the piece of sprung, you can either cut the warps at the middle and knot them off to get two identical pieces of fabric, which makes this a great technique for making pairs of items like socks or mittens, or you can use a crochet hook to chain the warps together to make one big piece of fabric, which is what I did for my first sample. Carol cut hers in half, but the YouTube channel SolRhiza Arts has several different sprung tutorials, including one on finishing, which is what I followed. I think it went well for a first attempt. The basic mechanics of it were super easy to pick up. It's just picking up a thread and putting down another one. As long as you keep track of where you are in the pattern, it's super easy to follow. It was really interesting to try this right after doing tablet weaving, because in both of them you have your warp threads and you twist them together in a way that interlocks them at both ends of the warp. But with the tablet weaving, you're working from one end forward, so you only want to keep the threads twisted at the end where you're working. You don't want it twisting at the far ends. But with sprang, that's like one of the main features of the craft. Like all the sources that I've looked at say something about how it's so much faster because every row that you work gives you 2 rows of finished fabric at the top and at the bottom. It's just really interesting how both of these techniques have such a similar mechanic and treat it so differently. For one, it's a problem that you have to employ all these different strategies to overcome, and for the other, it's like one of the main features of the whole process. So I just think that's really interesting. Yeah, I really enjoyed the process, and I want to try and make a bigger piece now, and for that I will need a frame. I've got a picture frame from the thrift store. I'm gonna try and take that apart and see if I can jerry-rig something. I haven't really found any sources yet that talk about taking it off of the frame and like finishing, but I have some ideas I'd like to try out, and I'm a little bit bored with the research at the moment. I just want to play around and try things out. So if it works, that's cool, but if it doesn't, that's fine too. So I'm gonna go see what I can do. I couldn't start working on just the frame alone because the sides are connected to the top and bottom. So once the sprung is twined together, I'd have to cut the warps off in order to get them off the frame and then tie them to resecure them. I needed to secure the warp to something I can slide out at the end. So my solution was to tie some knitting needles to the frame and attach the warp to that. This did once again lead to a very wonky warping process, but I don't even have an excuse this time like I did for the tablet weaving because I had already seen a tutorial for warping sprung by this point, and I simply chose not to do that. As a result, I ended up having to pull out quite a bit of slack from my warp, but once I had that fixed, I could spring right into my sprung. This go around, I made use of some shed sticks, aka more knitting needles, to help keep my two sets of warp threads separate. With a smaller sample, I could hold all of the warps in one hand, no problem, but with the bigger piece, I could only hold so many at a time. The shed stick lets me not have to hold all the warps that I've already twisted as I work down the row. The work got tighter the more I twisted the strands, so eventually I started using yet another knitting needle to pick up and drop the warps. Once the work became so tight that I could sprung no more, I chained off the warps in the middle, then I could remove the work from the frame and chain off the ends in the same way. Now I had a very stretchy, very squiggly piece of sprung. At this stage it reminded me a bit of a sea slug, but after some blocking it became nice and flat and smooth, like a sea slug that got crushed by a bulletin board in its sleep. So the third and final fiber art technique that I want to try out in this video is Nalbinding, which is yet another very old, ancient craft that has been documented all across the world. Nalbinding is another fabric making technique like sprung, and like sprung, it is actually older than knitting. The oldest samples that archaeologists have found date back to 6500 BCE, so that's pretty freaking old. It is kind of similar to knitting and crochet, but there are several key differences. The main difference being that with knitting and crochet, you work with one long, continuous piece of yarn, so you're working from the skein. But with Nalbinding, you're using multiple shorter lengths of yarn because you're essentially sewing loops through each other with the yarn, and you need the end of your working yarn to pass through the loops as you work, which you could theoretically do with a full skein of yarn. It would just be really, really annoying to have to pull like 200 meters worth of yarn through every stitch. You work Nalbinding with a needle, a sewing needle, not like a knitting needle. In all of the resources that I was looking at, they use these really pretty carved wood needles that are like big and chunky. They look very cool, and I wish I had one, but I don't. So instead, I'm going to be using a regular old modern day tapestry needle. So I have that, I have my yarn, I have scissors, so I think I have everything I need to try and get started. Out of all three of the crafts that I tried out for this video, Nalbinding was the one I found the most challenging to pick up. Tablet weaving was so similar to backstrap weaving, which I was already familiar with. On the other end of the spectrum, sprung was totally new for me, so I was starting out with a blank slate. Definitely more challenging than having a solid base, but I didn't have any close but not quite the same skills interfering in my head. Nalbinding was just similar enough to knitting and crochet that I had to work against my instincts. I also found that there were a lot of different tutorials online for Nalbinding, which is fantastic, but it seems that almost everyone has a slightly different method of getting started and a different style of demonstrating and explaining what they're doing. I had to try out several different tutorials from several different people before I started to get the hang of it and could make even a base starting chain. I ended up using a series of tutorials by Bonsai Woman here on YouTube. I found her method to be the easiest for me to follow, and she's very clear and concise in her videos. I'll link that playlist down below with the rest of the sources, but if you want to try out Nalbinding and her videos don't make it click for you, I'd recommend looking for other resources. Your brain might work better with a different tutorial. I started out learning the Oslo stitch. It's apparently the most basic one. To work it, you start with an overhand knot around your thumb, and then use the needle to pass the yarn under the knot to make a second loop around your thumb. Then you slide off the first loop and hold it in place at the pad of your thumb, and this becomes the back loop. Then you pass the needle through the back loop, twist, and then down through the thumb loop. This makes a new thumb loop, so the old thumb loop gets pushed up to become the new back loop, and the old back loop becomes part of the foundation chain. Once the chain is long enough, you start forming the next round or row by doing the exact same thing, but you start passing the needle through the first stitch of the previous row. Then you just keep doing that until you're happy with the size of whatever it is you're making. You can do increases or decreases to create some shaping, but for this first practice sample, I just did a simple straight tube. Since you're working with short lengths of yarn, you frequently need to add in a new piece. Having a bunch of knots in your work would get rather knobbly and has a risk of coming undone, so most sources that I saw recommended using a spit splice. This only works with pure non-superwash wool, as you're essentially just felting the ends of the two pieces of yarn together. You fray out the ends a bit, intermesh all of the plies of the two ends, and then add a little moisture. Either water or, as the name implies, a little bit of saliva if you don't mind getting fuzz in your mouth. Then you just create friction by rubbing the join between your hands, and voila! Okay, so I ended up doing a bunch of little samples of the Nalbinding, playing around with different techniques. I have like the original one that I first started out with, and I started playing with like increasing and decreasing. Then I tried using a knitting needle instead of my thumb to work off of to try and get some tighter stitches. I had seen like one thing briefly in my research about using a dowel with Nalbinding. I have no idea if this is what that was, and I did not do further research, but I did try it, and I didn't like it. Might have been doing it wrong, might not have been a technique at all. So then I tried with a heavier yarn. I used a bulky weight, but I don't have any bulky weight wool, so I can only do a small section. And then I tried working with the worsted weight wool again, but held double this time, and I really like how that started working up. I also played around with changing colors just to see how that looks. I actually really like the Nalbinding once I got a hang of it, so much so, in fact, I've actually started a full project. I'm making a little pair of pointy-toed slippers. I finished the toe portion and I've just started doing the short rows at the back for the shaping. From what I've read with Nalbinding, there aren't really like written patterns in the way that you can have like knitting patterns or crochet patterns these days, because you're working off of your thumb, and your thumb is not a standardized unit. It's more like project formulas and like guides as to how to make a thing. So I wanted to find just like a guide for how to make Nalbinding socks or slippers, and I found one by Shelagh Lewins, who made the first tutorial that I followed for tablet weaving. It's like a fun little cameo from back at the beginning of the video. I will link that sock tutorial down below with all of the other resources that I've used. These slippers are actually going to be a part of a bigger project that I am working on for later in the year. If you follow me over on Patreon and see my weekly project updates, then you'll know which one. And if you want to know what project that is, you can check out my Patreon. That will also be linked below if you're curious. The sprung and the tablet weaving are also going to be incorporated into that project, along with so many other things, because I like to bite off more than I can chew. That won't be out for several more months, so stay tuned if you want to see that. But yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this whole exploration process of getting to try out new skills. It was so fun. It was really nice to just play with materials and try new techniques that I'd never really done and make something new. And I'm really excited to have these skills in my toolkit. If I ever like have a project where one of them would be useful, I can be like, ooh, I know how to do that now. That is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you to everyone who supports me over on Patreon, especially those in the Magnanimous Maelstroms tier. Froggy in Love, Mary Jean Rue, Oscar, Obi Nick Kenobi, Evelyn, Bear Hardy, and Perfect Primrose. Subscribe, etc. Push whatever buttons you feel like pushing, and more importantly, go try something new today. Whether that be a craft project or a new recipe or something like that, go try something new. It'll be fun, I promise. I mean, I can't promise. That's not legally binding, but I hope it will be. Okay, bye.